meetings. When they return at 2:15, they'll continue with the small business bills, but first, newly elected Republicans Ohio will give their first floor speeches since election. And now to live coverage of the U.S. Senate here on C-SPAN 2.
The Senate will come to order. The chaplain, Dr. Barry Black, will lead the Senate in prayer.
Let us pray. Eternal God, keep us always thankful for your mercy and grace. May we never take for granted your generous gifts to us, and begin and end each day with words of petition, intercession, and thanksgiving. Continue to bless our lawmakers. Give them the wisdom to keep our nation on the sure foundation of your righteousness. May our senators be bastions of moral and spiritual power for the coming of your kingdom of justice and peace. Lord, give them the higher vision to work with integrity and to be content with the judgment of history and the knowledge of your approval. We pray in your holy name. Amen.
Please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
You too.
The clerk will read a communication to the Senate.
Washington, D.C., March 15, 2011, to the Senate. On the provisions of Rule 1, Paragraph 3 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, I hereby appoint the Honorable Jean Shaheen, a senator from the state of New Hampshire, to perform the duties of the chair. Son Daniel K. Inouye, President pro tempore.
Madam President,
The Majority Leader.
following any leader remarks, the Senate will proceed to morning business until 11 a.m. today. Senators will be permitted to speak for up to 10 minutes each during that time. The majority will control the first half. The Republicans will control the final half. Following morning business, the Senate will proceed to consideration of the reauthorization of the Small Business Innovation Act, S-493. The Senate will recess from 12:30 until 2:15 for the weekly caucus meetings. At 2:15, Senator Coates will be recognized to deliver his maiden speech. He'll be recognized for up to 30 minutes. Roll call votes in relation to amendments to the Small Business Jobs Bill are possible during today's session. Madam President, this bill is really another jobs bill, and really a very important bill. I did an event, press event yesterday with the chairman of the committee, Senator Landrieu, and it was a good meeting. We talked about some of the things that had happened in our states regarding small business under this program that was developed during President Reagan's administration. Some remarkably good things happened in every state. New Hampshire, I don't know which ones happened there, but there's a number of things in every state. In the state of Nevada, wonderful things have occurred there. One of the things, a smart man decided that we shouldn't have those 9/11 type incidents where people are trapped and can't get out of those high stories, and he has an apparatus that goes up there and can bring people up and down. And it was for an initial grant of some $150,000 that was able to do that. We have another battery that's now being used by the military that was for $180,000, did all these great things, giving batteries in vehicles. This didn't occur in Nevada, but one of the amazing things is electric toothbrush came about as a result of one of these small grants. Every state in America has benefited from these grants. The program has worked well for almost 30 years, and we're reauthorizing. That's what we're doing so that these programs can continue. We hope that people will offer amendments that improve this legislation, not detract from this legislation. We would really like to complete this legislation this week. We know we have the CR coming over here probably tonight sometime, and we'll have to deal with that. The next work period is going to be filled with a lot of things. We're going to soon have to go do the Patriot Act to reauthorize that. So we have many things to do, Madam President, but the things that we've done this year so far are job creating. Not only the small business legislation I just talked about, the patent bill, first revision of that in some 60 years, that's 300,000 jobs. FAA reauthorization, 280,000 jobs. I would hope that the House would complete these measures. We're waiting for them. The President's waiting for these matters. Rather than doing the things they're doing that are not job creating. There's a piece in the Washington Post today about how the Republicans are being so short-sighted. For every dollar we spend with the IRS going after people who cheat, we bring in more than $10 to the Treasury. They're cutting the ability of the IRS to go after people who cheat paying their taxes. That makes it more difficult for people who pay their taxes. So I would hope that they would get off the government bashing program they've been on and focus on job creation. We all know that we need to reduce our debt, and we're engaged in that, but in a way that is smart, not a way that is, as indicated in that Washington Post article, that is penny-wise and very, very pound-foolish. Would the Chair now announce morning business?
Under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved. Under the previous order, the Senate will be in a period of morning business until 11 a.m., with senators permitted to speak therein for up to 10 minutes each, with the time equally divided and controlled between the two leaders or their designees, with the majority controlling the first half and the Republicans controlling the final half.
I would note that.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Just getting the day started in the Senate on this Tuesday morning. General speeches until 11 Eastern. After that, the work on a measure that continues programs to help small business, high-tech, and research companies for another 8 years. The Senate will then be in recess at 12:30 for their weekly party lunch meetings. They'll return at 2:15 Eastern to continue working on the small business programs. Votes are possible throughout the day. Also, we expect maiden speeches from newly elected Republican Senators Dan Coats of Indiana and Dan Portman of Ohio. Senator Coats has previously served in the Senate from 1989 to 1999. He also served in the House. He was the U.S. ambassador to Germany, too.
Mr. Alexander.
Madam President,
The senator from Illinois.
ask consent the quorum call be suspended.
Without objection.
Madam President, are we in morning business?
We are.
And I ask consent to speak as if in morning business.
Without objection.
Madam President, last week Senator Inouye of Hawaii, the chairman of the Senate Appropriations Committee, proposed a bill to fund the government through the end of this fiscal year. It's hard to believe we're almost halfway through this year and still haven't resolved the basic issue of our budget. Our failure to resolve it, lurching from 2 weeks to 3 weeks of funding, may serve some political purpose. It doesn't serve the purpose of good government, because many people who have to make critical decisions which involve more than a momentary glimpse or glance at our fiscal situation are held back. I met a man last night whose business is to supply the United States of America with vaccine for anthrax, tuberculosis, and similar things. And we have an inadequate stockpile of vaccine. And the government has said to him, we want you to produce more vaccine, but we're only funded for 2 more weeks. And he said to me, how can I, as a businessman, make a commitment to produce vaccine with an uncertainty as to whether it will be paid for? That's a pretty reasonable question. And it reflects the fact that as we move from 2 weeks to 3 weeks of funding, postponements are made in decisions which have an impact on the future of our country. I'd like to address as well this morning something that goes beyond the obvious, stockpiling vaccine, and looks to some of the other aspects of the House Republican budget bill and what it will mean to America if it's adopted. This is a bill which they proudly boast will cut $100 billion in spending. And most people across America, sensitive to our deficit crisis, say, start by cutting spending. That's a reasonable request by voters in New Hampshire and Illinois, but there comes a moment when we have to use our best judgment about where cuts should be made and where cuts, when made, would cost us dearly for a long time to come. Senator Inouye tried to balance in his bill $51 billion in cuts below the President's original budget request in a way that won't hurt our investment in America's future and economic growth. Now, American innovation has always fueled economic sustainability and job creation. Senator Inouye's bill lays out a wise path toward providing more jobs and less debt, 2 things we desperately need to do. Under his alternative spending bill, which I supported, the budget for the National Institutes of Health, which is the premier agency for medical research in America, is frozen at $31 billion, same amount it received last year. This means the funds required to perform cutting-edge, breakthrough medical research and new clinical trials for much-needed cures and treatments will be available. It also means that nearly 12,000 jobs across the state of Illinois in hospitals, universities, and medical centers will continue to be supported under the Inouye budget. But under the House Republican budget, the National Institute of Health is cut by $1.6 billion. That is a cut that is severe by any measure. It would cause new construction projects to be halted when it comes to medical research laboratories and put 351,000 U.S. jobs in danger of being lost. We can't afford these short-sighted cuts when our nation is struggling, but is determined that we will come out of this stronger than we went in. That said, we know that freezing budgets is not going to be enough. Thoughtful and difficult cuts will have to be made. The Senate appropriation bills provide $6.8 billion for the National Science Foundation. This is a cut of $573 million from the President's budget, but it's still $284 million more than was provided in the bill passed by the House. Under the Democratic Senate alternative, we can continue to fund basic research, create jobs and programs that educate the next generation of scientists in America. That is not possible under the House bill. As I travel to research laboratories in my state, Oregon National Research Laboratory, the Northwestern University Medical Care Center, I meet some of the best and brightest young people I've ever seen in my life. They're from all over the world, and they come here because this is the place to do your research and to make the breakthrough findings that will change America and change the world. Thank God for their intelligence and their idealism. And they look at me and say, Senator, am I going to have a job 6 weeks from now? And if I'm not, tell me now. I have to make a plan with my life Maybe I'm going to leave research and go into work for a private company and make some more money. Maybe I'm going back home to another country where they will welcome me in my research capacity. So the generation of scientists who are affected by this decision are as important as the breakthroughs that might be found in the research itself. The National Science Foundation will continue to provide $8 million of innovation research to Illinois small businesses under the Inouye bill. But the funding level difference between the House and the Senate and what they want to cut and what we want to cut is dramatic. Let me give you an example. We are working on a new supercomputer at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. It's called Blue Waters. When it's completed, it will be the fastest computer in the world. Most Americans, if asked, where's the fastest computer in the world today, would probably say, well, America. We're the leaders. No, it's in China. And we are trying to devise and invent the next computer. What difference does it make? Because we know that fast computers make quick decisions and help us to find ways to solve problems we never even imagined before. We're about to sacrifice many of the economic gains that we can realize if we go through with the House Republican budget. The budget for the Department of Energy's Office of Science was also examined and cut by $388 million to $4.7 billion for the year. Now that's a $200 million cut. It's difficult because the Office of Science supports 7 of our national laboratories. University research centers and private companies use their facilities to create new drugs, biofuels, and solutions to our country's toughest problems. Research done by Abbott Laboratories at the Advanced Photon Source at the Argonne National Laboratory were crucial to the development of an AIDS drug, Kaletra, which is now the world's most prescribed drug for fighting AIDS and HIV virus. Cutting back on the funds for Argonne National Laboratory, dismissing 1/3 of their scientists and engineers, as the House Republican budget calls for, cutting back their research by 40% to 50% for the remainder of the year, slows down the use of the Advanced Photon Source, which is utilized by virtually every major pharmaceutical company. And does it work? Here's living proof. Kaletra, the most widely prescribed drug for fighting AIDS, developed at the Argonne National Laboratory. The House Republicans say, slow down, stop, we'll get back to you later. Can we really say that in a world that demands innovation and research, that is looking for solutions to problems? If we cut $1.1 billion from this account, as the House Republican budget suggests, facilities at the national laboratories in my state and across the country will shut down and workers will be laid off. That is a simple reality. I am not coming to the floor and engaging in scare tactics. This is what the directors of the laboratories have told me. If these centers and labs are closed, private companies, Eli Lilly, Texas Instruments, GE Research, and 3M, have a choice. If our labs are closed, they'll find labs overseas, outside the United States. Does that help our economy? Does that create jobs in America? To cut research? The House Republican budget cuts this research and innovation and welcomes these companies to leave and go overseas to create jobs. Could we possibly be envisioning that at a moment when we have so much unemployment and we're facing a recession in this country? Now, Japan, China, and Europe are ready to receive these research projects. They're building facilities in the hopes that these companies will decide that they're more reliable than the United States of America. That's what the House Republican budget threatens. Whether it's in medical research, energy research, finding new drugs, unless we make a commitment that people can count on, that research is going overseas and jobs will flow with that research to other countries and not to America. We need to cut the budget and reduce our deficit, no doubt about it. Let's not do so in a way that costs America jobs and cuts American innovation off the knees. The spending bill before the House of Representatives is going to cripple our economy at a time when it's just starting to recover. Economists tell us the House Republican budget will cost us more than 700,000 jobs. That's not the way to move America forward. We can find a way to eliminate tax loopholes and benefits. improve the way we spend money, and thoughtfully decrease our spending. These are elements of a sustainable plan for reaching the budget balance we're seeking and, equally important, the economic growth we need. You cannot balance the budget of America with 15 million people out of work. You have to build an economy that creates good-paying jobs and people drawing paychecks that pay their taxes, that sustain government growth as well as economic growth. I'm going to be working with my colleagues in the Senate to come up with a better approach than the House Republican budget, and I certainly believe that we can and should. Madam President, I now would like to make a statement and ask that it be put in a separate place in the record.
Without objection.
Madam President, I've come to the Senate floor a number of times over the past year to speak of my concerns about the rapid growth of for-profit colleges. I believe that some for-profit colleges are quality institutions, but I also believe that many are taking advantage of federal taxpayers' dollars and doing more harm than good for unsuspecting students. In no area is this issue more important than when it comes to our veterans. A few years ago, I proudly joined Senator James Webb of Virginia, who, when he came to the United States Senate 5 years ago, said to me, "I want to pass a new GI Bill. It's my #1 priority," and he did it. Thank goodness he did. This man, a veteran of the Vietnam conflict, who served in the U.S. Marine Corps, was later Secretary of the Navy, knows what he's talking about when it comes to veterans. He helped to put together the modern GI Bill, and I'm proud to have voted for it, as many of us did. When we passed that bill, we provided veterans with improved benefits to go to college. Veterans can receive up to $17,000 a year to cover the cost of tuition, fees, housing, and supplies at the college of their choice. Veterans can also access private schools through the Yellow Ribbon program, which allows the VA to pay a portion of private school tuition under agreements with these schools. Now, a lot of students are using the GI Bill to attend for-profit colleges, which are far more expensive than their public counterparts and even more expensive than many private not-for-profit universities. There's a rapid growth in veteran enrollment in these for-profit schools. For-profit schools, according to GAO review, cost an average of $14,000 a year compared to $2,500 a year at public two-year colleges and $7,000 at public four-year universities. In the first year of the post-9/11 GI Bill implementation, the Veterans Administration spent $697 million on students attending public schools and $640 million on students attending for-profit schools, almost the same. But we educated far more students for our money in public schools. 203,000 veterans at public schools compared to 76,000 at for-profit schools, which charge 2 or 3 times as much for tuition and obviously educate 1/2 to 1/3 of what the public schools educate. The top 5 for-profit recipients of post-9/11 GI Bill dollars received over $320 million from the Department of Veteran Affairs last year. ITT received $79 million. Apollo, which is the University of Phoenix, $76.9 million. Education Management Corporation, $60.5 million. Career Education Corporation, $58.2 million, and DeVry, $47.9 million. There are reports of for-profit colleges aggressively targeting military service members and veterans with expensive ad campaigns and hundreds of recruiters. One prominent for-profit college has 452 recruiters focusing on recruiting veterans out of the military. Another employs 300. Why do they want these students? Because when they bring the students in under the GI Bill, they get compensated at higher levels by the federal government. We have a limit that says that none of these for-profit schools can take more than 90% of their revenue out of the federal treasury. That's money that comes in through Pell Grants and federal college loans, and when it comes to the GI Bill, we raise the 90%. So these schools, which argue we're just in the private sector, we're just little businesses, get more than 90% of their revenue from the federal government. They're the most heavily subsidized private businesses in America. And it's time for us to ask, are the taxpayers getting their money's worth? Are the veterans getting their money's worth? It's troublesome when these schools spend so much money on recruiting students instead of educating them. I'm concerned the current system allows for-profit colleges to earn millions of dollars from taxpayer-funded programs while providing a low-quality education to students. We need to put the brakes on for-profit colleges that are targeting veterans to reap profits from taxpayers' dollars. Now, last week, the Department of Veterans Affairs announced that it and the Texas Veterans Commission had disqualified 3 Texas campuses of the so-called Westwood College. They could no longer receive GI Bill benefits. Westwood College is a for-profit college based out of Colorado with 17 locations in 6 states, several in Illinois. When I drive to O'Hare, I'm on the Kennedy Expressway, and I look up, and there is this office building and a big, huge sign, Westwood College. Wow, the campus of Westwood College. I know one of the students who went to Westwood College. This is a young lady who decided she needed to improve her life after high school and wanted to get into law enforcement. She enrolled at Westwood College to get a bachelor's degree in law enforcement. 5 years later, they handed her a diploma at Westwood College. She went to the Chicago Police Department, and they said, "We don't recognize that college. That's not a real college." She went to the Cook County Sheriff's Department, same response, and all of the law enforcement in the region said to her, "Westwood's not a real college. This isn't a real diploma." Well, she learned that to her disappointment, and she also learned to her disappointment she had incurred $90,000 in college student loans for this worthless Westwood College diploma. Now the Veterans Administration has closed down 3 Westwood College campuses in Texas for their recruiting tactics when it comes to our veterans. A lesson learned and a word of warning. This action against Westwood was in response to findings of erroneous, deceptive, misleading advertising and enrollment practices at Houston South, Dallas, and Fort Worth campuses. The Department of Veterans Affairs began its investigation after a GAO report, which Senator Tom Harkin and I requested, on recruiting practices at for-profit colleges. They sent undercover applicants to 15 of these for-profit colleges. They found that all 15 made deceptive or otherwise questionable statements to potential applicants, including Westwood. Investigators found admissions representatives at Westwood misstating the cost of programs, failing to disclose graduation rates, and even suggesting that applicants falsify federal financial aid forms.
Democrats. Majority has expired.
Madam President, I ask that the remainder of my statement be entered into the record, and I yield the floor.
Without objection.
Madam President.
The senator from Missouri.
Thanks, the President, for recognizing me. And, Madam President, next Wednesday marks the first anniversary of the day that President Obama signed the law signed the bill into law that really, in my opinion, and in the opinion of most Americans, is the greatest involvement in our nation's health care system in history. What we see as that law is discussed, as it's challenged in court, is a bill that was signed into law that was full of problems when it was signed into law. It was a bill full of constitutional questions, and in fact, while some courts have said it may be constitutional, others have said it's not. It was a bill where when the courts say, well, the federal government can't make you buy a commercially available product, then the same people that were saying a year ago that this requirement is not a tax are saying, well, maybe it's a tax. Maybe the Constitution allows us to define that particular purpose as a tax on the American people. But, Madam President, a year ago they were saying this is not a tax at all. This is definitely not a tax. There's no way this could ever be interpreted as a tax. But when courts say that you can't do this the way this bill did it, then suddenly they try to reinvent what the law was designed to do. One of the reasons this bill has so many of these kinds of problems is it was a rush to get a bill into law, more government control of health care into law, that couldn't have passed the Senate the day the President signed it into law. And so a bill that was full of concerns, a bill that the Senate voted on, never believing that it would actually become law, but would create a vehicle to become law, became the only option that the House leaders thought was available to them, and they passed it. And they passed it without the kind of process that would have produced a law that could stand to a constitutional challenge, produced a law that Americans would be more responsive to. And while the law was misguided, I believe, in its concept, more importantly, it was put together in what I think will be seen as the worst possible way. A rush to judgment to get a law on the books, and now the people who voted for the law are saying things like, well, there may be a better way than an individual requirement that everybody buy a specified, defined insurance policy. Now, not all the people are saying that, Madam President, but some are. And they're saying maybe we ought to look for that better way. The time to have looked for that better way was before the law was signed, the bill was signed into law, not after it's signed into law. And even the White House is saying there's certainly, let's work together to change this. This is headed fundamentally so much in the wrong direction. Changing it would not be the best option. Now, already in the Senate, we've voted not to vote on a repeal of this law that would allow us to replace it with better things. And unless those votes change, I guess that won't happen this year. But the view that Americans have of this law is not likely to change either. I certainly don't believe the government has the authority in the Constitution to penalize people for not buying a commercially available product. And then sometimes people say, well, the states require that under their Constitution to buy auto insurance if you drive a car. Well, one, that's a state decision, and two, they don't require you to drive a car. You don't have to have that particular product if you don't make that decision. This gives you no options but to pay a penalty or to do what the government says you have to do. During the debate surrounding this bill and immediately following the enactment of the bill, the American people began to tell us that this was not the approach they wanted. In Missouri, where I'm from, the first place that had an issue on the ballot where voters could speak about whether they wanted to be part of this new concept of more government control of health care or not, 71% of them said they didn't want to be part of it. That was in a primary election. Hundreds of thousands of people voted, and 71% of them said, we don't want to go in this direction. Missouri is a state that generally is pretty reflective of the country in our elections, in our economy, in how our population comes together. And 71% of them said, let's not do this. Let's do something besides this. They had a sense that this was a misguided plan that put government between them and their doctors, that had as one of its major tenets that the government would describe certain regimens of care that would have to be followed for doctors and hospitals to be reimbursed. Missourians, by and large, believe that this significantly changes, some would say implodes, our current health care system. And to make it worse, this law cuts Medicare by $500 billion, not to save Medicare or improve Medicare, but it cuts Medicare by $500 billion so we could start another health care program. It just makes so little sense as we look at Medicare, one of our major challenges as the demographics of the population change. Medicare, one of the areas where we know that in a handful of years, Medicare faces a generation of its greatest challenge, and we look for savings in Medicare, not to save Medicare, but to start a new program. That would be totally unacceptable anywhere except Washington, D.C. Makes as little sense to people as the idea that we can come up with a new trillion-dollar program over a handful of years and say that that's going to save money. Nobody believes that. Nobody believes that. When you look at the greater concept of what this law will do if it's ever implemented to change the relationship of people and their government, I can't think of anything besides the government taking over the economy that actually has greater potential to change that relationship than the government having more control of your health care. What more controlling element could the government look to than your health care and your family's health care to make you sure that you never got on the wrong side of that government? It does change that relationship. It also creates real uncertainty in what should be the #1 goal in America today, private sector job creation. If a year ago the President would have signed bills into law that encourage private sector job creation or created more certainty about our health care costs, about our utility bills, about our taxes, about regulation, rather than signing this bill into law, I believe we'd be much further down the road towards seeing private sector jobs, jobs that create taxpayers that help government provide the services that only government can provide. We'd be much further down that road. The very clear message that I heard and others heard all over the country in the last year was we don't want to create these jobs with all of these issues out there not yet really decided, and if they are decided, likely to be decided in a way that makes that job creating decision, less of a good decision than it would have been otherwise. You know, cap and trade in the middle of the country in Missouri, the 6th most dependent state on coal for its utilities, the estimate would double the utility bill in a dozen years. What's the job creation message there? We're exactly where we were 2 years ago on the tax question, because just a few months ago the President signed a bill that extended current tax policies, but only for 2 years. So we're no further down the road on that question than we were 2 years ago today. The President calls for regulations that make sense, and I join him in that, but we see none of that coming from the regulating authorities right now. The clear message that people had was that they'd like the government to create more certainty in the areas the government controls so that they can decide whether they want to take the certain risk that you always have when you create a job. I was in northwest Missouri not too long after this bill was signed into law a year ago, and very well remember a conversation I had with someone whose business was going well. In fact, he said, I've got 47 employees, and you'll remember that the bill creates a threshold of 50, that you have different kinds of obligation and regulation once you get to over 50 employees than you have before that. And he said, I've got 47 employees. I need to hire 6 more people right now. But I've looked at this health care law. My accountants have looked at this health care law. We're not going to get 1 inch closer, 1 employee closer to 50 than we are right now. And so there are 6 jobs that didn't get created. And his view of what to do about about his current situation was, I'm going to pay overtime, he said, until I can figure out what I'm doing that's not making much money, or in fact maybe even losing a little money, and I'm going to quit doing that. I'm going to be sure we get back to where we're truly a 47-employee business again instead of what should be a 53-employee business. Or the many employers I talked to said, we're just not going to hire full-time employees. We think we can get our job done with more part-time employees who don't force us into the environment under this law where the government comes in and says you have to pay a penalty or you have to offer an unknown insurance policy that will be created by some group created by the Congress that says what everybody's insurance policy has to look like. You know, one size fits all almost never fits anybody, and it won't fit anybody in this insurance plan that this bill anticipates and mandates. What you need is more competition, more choice, real sustainable understanding that the marketplace works. And on the job creation front, private sector job creation will not occur until we do the things we need to do that create more certainty in the job-creating marketplace. Letting families keep more of what they earn, economic incentives for small business, government that doesn't constantly talk about how it can raise all the cost that you have as the underlying cost of the business you create. While I would be voting if we would have a chance to repeal this bill, I would also be working hard to replace it with better solutions. Maybe the only good thing about this health care bill is it requires us to either go down a road that most Americans now think is the wrong direction or to really tackle these big questions involving health care. Things like small business health care plans. At one time, they were called association health care plans, where you could find some bigger group to affiliate with if you were an individual or a business and get your insurance that way rather than trying to get it as an individual. Medical liability reform, a concept that I've sponsored legislation on and others have over and over again to see it pass the House of Representatives and not get voted on 7 times in the United States Senate. The one medical liability bill last year, the estimate was it would save $56 billion for health care under current government programs, and at least that much more in health care cost for Americans who pay for their own health care or have their own private insurance. That's over $100 billion in savings at a time when we need to be looking for every $100 billion of savings we could have. And unfortunately, in our current situation, it takes several of those $100 billion, 16 of them, in fact, to just get the balance back, the budget back in balance. We can't afford not to do things that would save $100 billion. Risk pools. Nobody wants people not to be able to get insurance because of pre-existing conditions, but they're not moving in the direction this bill would allow them to move. In fact, the people that have signed up for the concept that the bill put out there of how to open risk pools, I think is about 6% of the anticipated number. When you're meeting the target is 6% of what you thought the law would encourage people to do, obviously there's something wrong with the way that's put together. It's only 94% short of the estimate of people that would rally to risk pools that allowed for access if you have a pre-existing condition. There are better ways to expand these risk pools that are better than telling people, no, you just will get insurance the same way everybody else gets it for the same thing they pay for it any time you need it, which is what the bill says. You'll just have to pay a penalty in the interim that's much less than it would have cost you to have insurance. People will figure that out, and they'll figure that out pretty quickly. On what may have been that same visit with the employer at Rockport, Missouri, I was talking to a hospital in that area right after this bill passed. They said, I guess if this bill goes into law, we'll just put the insurance application forms in the ambulance. That way you can get your insurance on the way to the hospital, because after all, under the bill, you'd pay 100% of what everybody else was paying. So why would you want to pay 100% until the day you knew you needed it? This is a badly thought out concept. Expanding risk pools in other ways and helping fund and encourage those risk pools would have been the better way to do that. Being sure that families still make family decisions about health care instead of being told, no, there's only one option that your health care plan that is defined by the government will pay for. Encouraging coverage available in other states. Buying this product across state lines. There's no reason not to have a health care marketplace. And it doesn't just have to be buying the product in the half dozen states that that touch Missouri, the 6 or 7 states that touch Missouri, it has to be buying in a marketplace. There's no reason it can't be buying in a marketplace that's the national marketplace. A competition produces better choices, and it also produces more choices. And more choices so that you can look at the health care plan that's right for your family or you as an individual, rather than the health care plan that some newly created board and agency said had to be the health care plan for everyone to meet the new federal government standards. Tax equity, if you buy health care on your own, you should do that with pre-tax dollars, just like the biggest corporation in America buys health care for their employees with pre-tax dollars. More transparency of how health care works. I'd like to know if I'm on the way to get a health care procedure. I'd like to know before I left to do that, what do people charge and what are their results? Most trips for health care are not to the emergency room. They're planned trips to health care. And once you're in the car, if it means driving another 20 minutes or an hour and 20 minutes to get to the place that does a better job for less money, I think most Americans would do that. And we know this, Madam President. These factors are generally known. I remember a study just a year or so ago that was checking to see the survival rates for in-hospital heart attacks based on the response time. And that information is all available. At this point, it's available anonymously, but if it's available anonymously, it would also be available specifically and more transparency in the system. How do you go to the place that gets the best results, or if the results are the same, how do you go to the place that gets the best results for the better cost? When employers are telling us they're not hiring because of the uncertainty created by this law, when courts are ruling the law is unconstitutional, or even when courts disagree on this topic, when some courts think it's unconstitutional and some think it is, when voters are overwhelmingly rejecting it every opportunity they've had at the polling place to vote on it, something is wrong with the direction we're headed. Americans deserve a country where the people are still in the driver's seat, where the people are bigger than the government, where the people are making decisions for themselves and their family about lots of things, but particularly about health care. I'm working and will keep working to repeal this bill and replace it with things that make more sense, things that move us toward more competition, more transparency, and better health care. The anniversary of this signing next week would be better spent if we were all here next week trying to come up with things that make health care sense, that make economic sense, that meet the constitutional standard, and still keep people in charge of these important life-sustaining, health-sustaining decisions. Madam President, I would yield back. And question a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll. Mr. Akaka.
General speeches in the Senate for another 5 minutes or so. On the agenda for the rest of the day, a measure that continues programs to help small business, high-tech, and research companies for another 8 years. The Senate will go into recess at 12:30 for their weekly party lunch meetings. They'll return at 2:15 Eastern to continue work on small business programs, and votes are possible throughout the day. Also today, we expect maiden speeches from newly elected Republican Senators Dan Coats of Indiana and Rob Portman of Ohio. Senator Coats has previously served in the Senate from 1989 to 1999. The U.S. House gavelled in this morning at 10. Most of their day will be spent on debating a 3-week extension for federal spending. Current funding runs out on March 18th. The temporary extension will give members more time to negotiate spending for the rest of the budget year that ends in September.
Madam President.
Senator from North Dakota.
I ask that the quorum call be suspended.
Without objection.
I also ask unanimous consent to speak in morning business for 10 minutes.
Without objection.
Thank you. Mr. President, Madam President, I would like to speak this morning on an issue that I believe is of great importance to our economy and to our national security. In recent weeks, we've seen political turmoil in Libya and Egypt and Tunisia and throughout the Middle East and other North African nations. Only time will tell what the outcome of these historic events will be. What is clear, however, is that there is once again disruption in the world's petroleum supplies as a result of the turmoil in this region of the world, and American consumers and businesses are feeling the brunt of it. In the United States, we've seen the price of gasoline and other petroleum products increase dramatically. The pain is particularly sharp at the pump. Over the last few weeks, retail gasoline prices have risen to more than $3.50 a gallon. They're expected to rise to more than $3.70 a gallon during the peak summer driving season, and of course they could go substantially higher. This is a reflection of what's happening in the crude oil commodity markets around the world. Energy Information Administration's latest forecast for the remainder of this year increased from $93 a barrel to more than $100 a barrel. And the EIA expects continued tightening of world oil markets in the next 2 years in light of the events in North Africa and in the Middle East. For example, in Libya, it's widely reported that much of the country's 1.6 million barrels a day of total production in 2010 has been largely shut down. And it's unclear how long this will last. However, the reality is that the problem is not a matter of current supply. Prices are going up not because of lack of supply, but because of concerns in the market about future supplies. Therefore, to address this problem, we must increase domestic production. We must produce more American energy, and we can do it. Furthermore, taking steps now to create a legal tax and regulatory environment that will stimulate more domestic production will help take pressure off prices even before that supply comes online as markets anticipate more production. Of course, the opposite scenario exists today as markets anticipate less supply from the Middle East. And they do not see the commitment domestically here in America to offset that reduction in supply. We must change that perception by taking real action to encourage production here at home. Stalled energy projects and impediments to domestic oil production in our own country are costing our nation's economy billions of dollars and millions of jobs. A study released just last week by the United States Chamber of Commerce says 351 energy projects, both renewable and traditional, are stalled at a cost of $1.1 trillion to the American economy and nearly 2 million jobs for the American people. When you combine disruptions in foreign sources of production and a domestic market hobbled by bureaucracy and delays, the result is higher energy prices, a sluggish economy, and fewer jobs. And that's exactly what we see happening. That should be a cause of huge concern, but it should also be a huge call to action. There is a path out of this for America, a path that we in my home state of North Dakota successfully followed starting a decade ago by building a comprehensive energy plan called Empower North Dakota. Through Empower North Dakota, we worked to create a business climate that incentivized energy companies across all industry sectors, including the oil industry, to invest in our state. We created the kind of legal tax and regulatory certainty that attracted capital, expertise, and jobs to North Dakota. In fact, when we started 10 years ago, oil companies had either left or they were leaving the oil-producing region in our state, the Williston Basin. Why was that? Well, first, they were getting better returns elsewhere. Technology was lacking to produce oil economically from new formations. Companies were going to other places in the world where they could extract oil less expensively. Second, the data on confirmed reserves was lacking, and the technology to produce oil from shale really wasn't sufficiently developed. Third, the workforce was aging, and we lacked the training and education for new workers. And fourth, transport constraints limited production. In other words, there were better places for the industry to invest shareholder dollars and earn a return. To turn that around, we built a climate for investment. We established an oil and gas research fund paid for by the industry. We put tax incentives in place. We initiated studies of the Bakken Formation at the heart of the Williston Basin through the North Dakota Geological Survey. Now, that was followed up by a United States Geological Survey study, and I've requested another USGS study, which I think will demonstrate that we have billions more in recoverable oil reserves in our state. We also improved infrastructure. We created a pipeline authority to expand transportation capacity, and we established a Center of Excellence for Petroleum Safety and Technology at Williston State College to train workers in the oil field drilling and recovery methods. Before that, we had to send those workers to Wyoming or to Oklahoma and other places for training and education. Now we do it in our state. In response, our enhanced business environment drew investment capital, technology, and ingenuity to the Williston Basin, which unlocked the potential of North Dakota's oil patch. We took full advantage of the Bakken and the Three Forks, which are deep shale formations with billions of barrels of oil locked away in porous rock, by using innovative, unconventional technologies and with good environmental stewardship. To release the oil companies in North Dakota, use hydraulic fracturing, which involves pumping water under pressure deep into the earth to crack the shale and release the crude oil. The water is then recycled or deposited safely back into the ground 2 miles down, well below, far below the water table. Companies also use directional drilling, which enables drilling rigs to drill one vertical bore and multiple horizontal bores deep in the ground, producing more oil with a smaller footprint and, again, better environmental stewardship. As a result, this year, North Dakota will produce more than 120 million barrels of oil, and that number is growing dramatically. And this is sweet crude oil. Since 2006, we've grown to become the fourth largest oil-producing state among all 50 states in the Union, passing up states like Oklahoma and most recently Louisiana. Bear in mind that in North Dakota, the measures we took weren't about government spending. They were about creating an environment for private investment that generated revenues for the state, broadened the economic base, and actually enabled us to reduce taxes. Now, this isn't a Republican or a Democrat issue. It's an American issue, and it will take both parties to fix it. And that's why I'm co-sponsoring a bill with Senator Pat Roberts that actually works with a directive from President Obama. The Regulatory Responsibility for Our Economy Act will give the force of law to a presidential executive order issued in January. The order proposes to review, quote, rules that may be outmoded, ineffective, or excessively burdensome, and to modify, streamline, or repeal them. Now, we're all committed to good environmental stewardship and effective consumer protections, but the President's order acknowledges that federal regulations are hindering the nation's economic growth and our ability to create jobs. The law we are proposing, if passed, will make sure that we take a clear-eyed look at our rules and help to bring regulatory and legal certainty to the markets. And while we're working to produce more oil in America, I'd add that with the right approach, with the approach that I'm describing, we can also enlist the help of our friend and close ally to the north, Canada. To do that, for example, we need to complete some very ambitious projects that need permitting and approval. One example, the Keystone XL pipeline. This $12 billion high-tech transcontinental petroleum pipeline is designed to carry crude from the Canadian oil sands in Alberta, Canada, to the Gulf of Mexico. As it passes through the Midwest, an on-ramp will receive Midwestern sweet crude from states like North Dakota and Montana to mix with the heavier Canadian crude and send it to the refineries that will turn it into gasoline and diesel fuel right here in America. With no overseas involvement, this one promising project could help double current flows of oil from Canada, which is already our #1 trading partner. One estimate projects that the project will create, and these are numbers that the company has put forward in advancing this project, but their estimates project that this project will create at least 20,000 high-paying jobs during the construction phase and more than 250,000 permanent jobs. It will spur more than $100 billion in annual total expenditures in the U.S. economy. It will generate $6.5 billion in new personal income for U.S. workers and their families, and it will stimulate nearly $600 million in revenue for state and local governments along its route. Now, federal approval is something that will cost our nation not one penny. What it will do, however, is create assurances in markets that the energy we need to power our nation will be there in the future, and that it will be there when we need it. That, in turn, will help to reduce our dependence on unstable overseas regimes, hold down the cost of gasoline at the pump, and create thousands of good American jobs at a time when unemployment is still hovering at about 9% in this country. And Keystone XL is just one example. Across America, there are hundreds of projects like it that could be advanced with good environmental stewardship and responsible oversight if we resolve to do it and we create the climate to do it. Today, the United States, Canada, and Mexico combined produce 75% of the total oil that we need, and we can do much more. Our nation needs to send a signal to the energy markets that the United States is committed to a policy of aggressive domestic energy development by creating a strong business environment and a pro-energy agenda, including the legal tax and regulatory certainty that companies need in order to make the kinds of investments that will truly lessen our dependence on foreign oil. Madam President, we are at a moment in our history when we can truly turn adversity into opportunity, potential into reality. I urge our members to seize this opportunity to make America stronger, safer, and more financially secure with a comprehensive approach to truly develop American energy right here at home to meet our needs both now and for future generations. We can do it. We must do it for the well-being of our country today and for those future generations. Madam President, I thank you for this opportunity, and I suggest the absence of a quorum call.